Hello guys, Crispy here, welcome back to another video. It is one, my friends, I'm gonna be testing a GeForce RTX 4090 in Indiana Jones, this time with ray tracing and path tracing. This one is the Asus ROG Strix version of the card. I am running it with the latest nvidia drivers and I'm not manually overclocking it. You can see all of its specs right here in Tech Power-Up's GPU-Z, and over on the left I am pairing it with a Ryzen 9 7950X 3D CPU with half of its cores disabled, making it the same as a 7800X 3D and 32GB of RAM. Let's get into it, shall we? Alright, let's go for the settings first. I have it set to 4K resolution at the moment, and we're utilizing the Supreme settings right here, but this time around, we have access to the ray tracing options under the advanced video settings. Instead of only having the upscaling options right here, we gained all of these over here. Now, you can see over here on the right that even when this option is disabled, the ray tracing is still enabled. So when this is set to off, path tracing is disabled, and only ray tracing global illumination is used. So we don't get any RT sun shadows, RT reflections, and RT indirect illumination if we have this turned off. And that's why, I will showcase this now, we have such poor looking shadow quality basically, because only the GI, the global illumination, is ray traced at this point. You can see a lot of shadow popping even here, for example, as I walk. Look at that. Yeah, it's pretty bad in terms of shadow popping if you don't have the path tracing option enabled, but the good thing is it runs really well. It seems to be a little bit slower than the early access version. I was getting like 110 frames per second here, now we're down to 104. It's minimal, but I think they fixed a little bit of the shadow draw distance, you know, they improved it a little bit, but it's still very noticeable, all of the popping happening in front of us. So with that said, I am back up here in this area, the initial part of the game, and let's enable that path tracing and see how much of a difference it makes to the image quality. So first of all, I will set it to medium here, which has the RT sun shadows on and everything else off. Well, everything else is two settings. So this is path tracing set to medium, guys, and as you can see, the RT sun shadows fix the little popping issues that we were seeing in these bushes right here. So no more of shadow popping in everywhere and being ugly because of it. It's a bit distracting, you know, like the game overall still looks good even without the path tracing enabled, but yeah, those little shadow popping issues are definitely annoying, at least to me. And yeah, we're getting 60 FPS. So we dropped from 100 frames per second or close to it to 60 frames per second. I'm gonna play all the way through this little first mission, okay, all the way until we reach a lake area. Unfortunately, there are some cutscenes in between, so I have to restart the counting system, the FPS counting, every single time, because we got little stutters when I skip the cutscenes, basically. But overall, it's a really smooth experience, as you can see. Like, they also seem to have fixed the instability issues that I was seeing with the early access version with the 4090. I saw some frame time variation, you know, and now it's completely flat. Even without the path tracing enabled, it was completely flat. But anyways, the path tracing definitely improves our experience, visually speaking. There's no more shadow popping, and that was my major issue previously with the early access version of the game. Another cutscene, there goes our 1% lows, so I'm just gonna stop it and skip it. And we're finally here, guys. This is where I wanted to showcase the shadow popping issue, because it is completely fixed at this point. As you can see, wait a second, over here it still has a little bit of it, but mostly it's really minor, you know, it doesn't matter, and it looks way better than it did previously, which I will showcase now. So we got like 50 to 60 FPS most of the time in these jungle areas. Sometimes it goes above 60 frames per second, which is decent, and this is without any upscaling enabled, you know. DLSS super resolution is still at DLAA, so it's native res, just applying the anti-aliasing from DLSS. And frame generation is also off, so we can improve this by a lot, okay? But anyway, I'm gonna disable the path tracing now, guys, and you can see that the shadows look totally different, right? And the shadow popping, well, I guess it's kind of the same thing. It happens at the same time as the path traced shadows do, but it's much more noticeable here with these shadows, right? And some of the shadows won't even pop in like that. Also, that tree over there, the detail of the tree is actually changing a lot in this particular scenario as well, even with Supreme settings enabled. And I think it happened probably with path tracing enabled as well. We gotta check that out, guys. But yeah, we're getting 100 FPS here instead of 60. But I think if you have 4090, you will want to utilize path tracing in this game. It doesn't kill your FPS completely. You still got the DLSS quality to utilize, or frame generation, which will improve things by a lot, and it will be much better. Yeah, the LOD of the tree is extremely low still, guys, even after this update, as you can see. And that's why the little shadow popping issues still happen with this particular tree, okay? Because back there, with the other bushes at the start, you saw there was no shadow popping anymore. But over here, it's pretty weird, right? It's pretty weird. Also, I took a look at the city area. You get more FPS there, and that's why I'm not going there in this video. Let's go down here now and use that quality DLSS, which is right here. So with quality DLSS over medium ray trace, or path tracing actually, and supreme settings everywhere else, gives us 90 frames per second, while looking pretty much the same as native resolution. So now we're back to almost the same FPS that we were seeing before at native res without any path tracing enabled, but now we have the added benefit, of course, of not having horrible shadow popping everywhere. It will still happen every once in a while, of course, but yeah, it's much less noticeable and it's a lot minimized compared to what it was previously, of course, without any path tracing. So yeah, this is a really smooth experience now. You can get 80 plus frames per second. I mean, over here, looking in this direction is usually where it drops the most, and it's only dropping to like 83 frames, 80, 79. All right. So no problems here, guys, in terms of shadow popping anymore. No problems in terms of dropping from 60 FPS anymore because the DLSS quality is enabled. And we still get pretty much the same visuals at 4K resolution with DLSS quality compared to the LAA. This is how I'd play this game if I didn't really want a super high refresh rate experience. You know, this still feels really smooth, obviously, in a high refresh rate monitor, but we can make it faster by the use of some frame generation, obviously. So I think now we should check that out, and enabling frame generation over quality DLSS will make it slightly softer than native resolution, okay? Still, I can't really tell much of a difference, even in my 42-inch monitor. Yeah, I guess it is slightly softer, but it's minimal, guys. And now we're up into the 100s with path tracing medium, of course. So still not full-on path tracing enabled, all of the ray tracing features, you know, but it is pretty impressive because we fixed the major issue that we had previously without any path tracing enabled, which is the shadow quality and popping. So yeah, now we can have a high refresh rate experience, not super ultra high refresh rate. For that, you'd probably need to utilize Perfrormance DLSS instead, for example, but you can have a really nice experience here. And in terms of input lag, it's pretty negligible as well, since it's always above 100 frames per second. You can notice it's a little bit worse than it was previously, but it doesn't really matter, honestly. Really smooth, very solid. I would definitely choose to play like this, either this or with frame generation disabled if input lag matters to you. Now, another option that you could utilize here at 4K resolution is DLAA plus frame generation. The baseline FPS of native resolution were around 60, so frame generation over 60 still feels pretty good. And we get 80s, 70s, pretty much the same thing, maybe a little bit lower than DLSS quality, right? Yeah, but now we have the added input lag from frame generation, which at 80 frames per second and dropping into the 70s sometimes, it is noticeable, okay? But another thing that you can do is play with like Perfrormance DLSS. If you set DLSS to auto, it is actually set to performance at the 4K resolution, balanced at 1440p and quality at 1080p. And on performance, this is upscaling from a 1080p image. You can tell that things are softer now, for sure, okay? But I am on a 42-inch monitor, so of course I can tell all of those imperfections, right? If you are on like a 32-inch or a 27-inch, it's going to be harder to tell the difference with performance DLSS and quality DLSS and even native resolution. But yeah, on the water is a little bit noisier as well, so there's that, guys. I mean, you do get way higher FPS, and if the slightly softer overall picture doesn't bother you, performance DLSS is still going to look really, really good at 4K resolution. So it's another option to play the game with if all you want is good-looking shadows, god damn it, and good FPS at the same time. And obviously, if you want super high refresh rate experience, you always got the option of enabling frame generation over performance DLSS, and this way we can finally achieve 144 frames per second sometimes. Buttery smooth experience, basically. You're gonna max out a 120 Hz 4K monitor, like mine. I'm using an LG C2 OLED, 42 inches, which is 120 Hz. So this way it's always above my refresh rate, and yeah, it's buttery smooth, and even on like a 240 Hz 4K monitor, for example, 140 Hz or 140 FPS will feel really, really smooth anyways. So no problems here, guys. Alright, now it's time for us to bring it up a notch. Let's go to high path tracing, okay, or full ray tracing, and this also enables RT reflections. So now we have RT sun shadows and RT reflections at the same time. DLSS is back to DLAA, frame generation is back to off, so we're at native, and here at the beginning we're getting 30s. Guys, yep, this starts getting extremely intensive, and I think I would actually just use medium path tracing, honestly, because that fixes, again, the shadow popping issue, which was the main problem that I had with this. And everything else, at least in this particular area of the game, looks pretty similar, probably because we don't have reflections showing up in the image at the moment, yet it is still eating a ton of FPS, right? Well, let's start counting the frames here, run through the woods for a little bit. This is still native resolution. I would definitely not play with native resolution with any form of path tracing, you know? Yeah, over here, for example, it is reflecting that over there, that little hole around the trees, right? Or maybe this? I don't know. It seems like it is this one. Okay, but it's really minor, guys, right? The performance hit is not worth it, in my opinion, to enable high path tracing in this game. You bought a 4090, you want super high FPS, so that's why I am going to change the DLSS settings right away. So let's use DLSS quality first, no frame generation, and this puts us at around the same FPS as native resolution with path tracing set to medium, so only the RT shadows enabled. And well, it is a playable experience. It's still not 60 FPS, but it's a heck of a lot better than 30 FPS were. Still looks really good right now, but again, I'm not really seeing a major difference. Maybe I'm looking at the wrong things, but yeah, by the way, the LOD on the trees is still exactly the same. That won't change with any RT settings. That's just the game itself, and you can't really go above supreme settings. I wish they would fix that or increase the LOD just a little bit more. I want to see if I can spot some ray traced reflections. Maybe those over there? No, those aren't even ray traced, because that reflection, for example, is disappearing once the object is off screen, so that's not it. Can I see myself on the water? It's very hard, guys. You get the idea, right? If you want high path tracing, the differences are very, very minimal here, you know? I'm actually going to the city area to see if I can spot some reflections there. As I told you, by the way, the city area runs a lot better, so we're up to like 70s and even 80 FPS at times. Pretty impressive. It looks way better now with path tracing enabled than it did with without it, basically, right? And by the way, the stutters that we see here turn out to be checkpoints. There are checkpoints everywhere in this city, and all of them will make your game stutter a little bit. So yeah, it's pretty annoying actually. All right, I'm trying to check out these reflections here, but again, I'm not seeing major reflections. So there's that. Oh boy, it's very hard to come by some reflections, apparently, even with the path traced reflections taking a lot of FPS from us. Yeah, it's not very noticeable. Maybe here? I guess, yeah, those are path traced reflections. So basically, standing right here, we see that arch over there. You know, like that little arch. So what if I disable the RT reflections? Okay, they're all gone. All right, so it does make a difference, after all. It's not night and day, but it does make a difference, guys. Standing right here again. Let's go down here. RT reflections on. Yeah, okay. So it adds a little bit to the atmosphere for sure when you have the RT reflections on. So maybe you want to turn that on. It adds to the experience a little bit, actually, not gonna lie. Let me just go here, options, video, disable it again. By the way, when we disable RT reflections, this goes to medium, of course. Yeah, look at that. That's a big difference, actually. We don't have the blue hue of the sky on the ground anymore without the path trace reflections, RT reflections on, and oh, wow. Yeah. Okay. At first glance, I thought it didn't really make all that much of a difference, and in the jungle area, it didn't really, because you didn't have a ton of these reflective surfaces. But here, yeah, it does make a difference, guys. It does make a difference. So if you want the best visual fidelity, this is it, guys. Okay, well, this is still not it because it's still not the full RT setting. All right, that will come a little bit later, but we're getting close to it, and we're seeing what differences each setting makes here. And now we're getting like 66 frames per second in this area, and I will play around with the DLSS now. Let's enable frame generation and see what that does to the frame rate. I guess it's going to be in the 80s. Ooh, no, okay. It's a little bit higher than 80s right now. Quality DLSS and frame generation. I wouldn't recommend you to use FG over native here because the native FPS were 30 to 40 most of the time. So that would be a terrible experience in terms of input lag if you enabled FG over it. But FG over quality DLSS actually works pretty decently. It's not dropping too much into the 80s. And over here in terms of input lag, yeah, 90 FPS is much better in terms of input lag than 80 FPS was. But you can still notice it a bit. I think if you are playing this with a controller, for example, you won't really notice the input lag here with 90 frames per second and frame generation. But with mouse and keyboards, you do notice it a little bit. Anyway, let's disable the frame generation, go down to Perfrormance DLSS. Maybe this will give us 60 plus FPS all of the time natively. And I think it does, dropping into the 70s sometimes. So this is high path tracing, guys, at 4K Perfrormance DLSS, which again has more noise on the water and stuff, very noticeable right now over there, especially while you move. If you stand still, everything becomes decent, but when you move, it adds a bit of noise to the picture for sure. But now we're getting 60 plus 100% of the time. So if you don't like frame generation, if you don't like the added input lag by frame generation, you can use Perfrormance DLSS and it will give you very smooth frame rates all the way through with minimal impact to the visuals, honestly. So let's stop it there, guys, and let's enable frame generation over Perfrormance DLSS. And here we should be looking at, 120 frames per second. Alright, so it's still possible to achieve a high refresh rate experience with these graphics, and they look great, alright? It's pretty cool of an experience right now, especially in the city area, once again, where you are going to notice those RT reflections being in place. This is it, guys. You can still have a close to high refresh rate experience. It is a high refresh rate experience. Input lag is also minimal like this with 100 plus FPS once again. So if you are after that high refresh rate experience with path tracing, this is it. Now, we're on high path tracing native resolution, okay? And I'm standing right here getting 41 frames per second. Let's see how much that changes now with the full-on maximum settings in this particular title. Full RT is enabled, so that enables RT indirect illumination now, and of course it keeps the other RT settings on. We're using DLAA, no frame generation, and we went from 41 FPS to 33 FPS. So another big drop to performance for sure. 32. Yeah. I'm going back to this initial part of the game again, still getting 30s. It looks pretty good right now, actually. Like, the path tracing actually fixed pretty much all of the issues that I had visually speaking with this game. You know, aside from the LOD of the trees, which is still very low. 28 frames per second. Oh, we're destroying our 4090 now. Now I can call this video Destroying the RTX 4090 with path tracing in Indiana Jones. Damn, this is intensive now. Obviously, this is unplayable at this point, so we need to utilize those DLSS features to make it playable, okay? So let's use quality now, and with full ray tracing enabled, full path tracing, and DLSS quality, it seems like it is getting decent FPS. Well, decent for what it is, I guess. Compared to native resolution, these are definitely decent FPS, right? 40s. It's playable now, especially if you are on a controller, but it's still not what you'd want coming from a 4090. If you're spending $1,600 minimum on this GPU, you want a high refresh rate experience, in my opinion, at least. So yeah, you won't be sticking with 40-ish frames per second, in my opinion. So I'm gonna stop it there, okay? Quality DLSS is still not the way to go. Obviously, you have frame generation that you can enable over quality DLSS. That will give us 60 plus FPS, as you can see, but the input lag now, since the FPS are in the 60s and 70s, is extreme. So unless you are playing with a controller, and you will still notice a little bit of input lag even with a controller, I would not do this, okay? I would strongly recommend you not to play with these settings right now because of the input lag. It makes things feel really bad. So I'm going to disable frame generation and enable performance DLSS. Hopefully this stays above 60. All right, okay, so it will still dip down into the 50s sometimes, but it's not a major problem, I guess. If you want native FPS, and 60 FPS is all you need, 60 average, I guess, this is it. You can enable full path tracing. The lighting looks pretty incredible, actually. Yeah, right now. Whew, look at that. I like it. I like the graphics here. I think I would still stick with RT shadows alone for that higher refresh rate experience, but that's down to personal preference, of course. This is still without any frame generation, and this is a good baseline for sure to enable frame generation. Once we enable that, the input lag shouldn't be too bad. Here we go, DLSS frame generation on top of DLSS performance, on top of full ray tracing enabled, path tracing, maxed out settings everywhere, aside from native res, of course. And yeah, it is getting us 90 to 100 frames per second, dropping down into the 80s sometimes, which means that you can still feel a little bit of input lag. It's not going to be too distracting though, and I feel like it looks pretty good. Like, if you want to max out the graphics in this game, and you don't mind playing with... It's a shame that we can't go back there, actually. You don't mind playing with performance DLSS and frame generation at the same time. This is pretty incredible. Let me just check it in the city area with the new illumination. And we're getting 130s. The difference is huge right now. Oh, man. Look at that LOD, bro. How come this is max settings? Ah, it's a shame. It's a shame. You're gonna notice that very often. So yeah, in the city area, it's going to get you a proper high refresh rate experience, you know? No more 90s. Difference is huge. 40 FPS difference coming from the jungle to the city over here. Kind of crazy, right? And once again, we got that blue reflecting off the ground over here, the blue from the sky. Oh, Forza! It's Forza Horizon 5! Anyway, that's it for this one. The 4090 can definitely run path tracing here, but I'm not sure about weaker GPUs. We're gonna find out in some other videos coming this week, of course. As long as you guys are interested in watching, I will keep making these videos. So thanks for watching. I'll catch you in the next one. As always, love you all. Bye-bye. Also, bye, Bob!